Hello, I'm Scott Wipperman, the pastor here at First Presbyterian Church. And no matter who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, know that you're welcome here. We hope you enjoy today's service on this video, and we invite you to come join us for worship anytime that you would like, or join us in any of the other activities of the church. For more information about First Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at fpchelena.com or call us at 442-4775. God bless. The New Testament comes from Matthew, chapter 10. Jesus is speaking to his disciples. And he says, He who receives me, he who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives the one who sent me. Anyone who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And anyone who receives a righteous man because he is a righteous man will receive a righteous man's reward. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of those little ones because he is my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward. The word of the Lord. Well, when Paul was talking to the Romans, he has a tendency to say that basically our inclination seems to be to sin. Our inclination is to be self-serving and to do what is best for us, and which quite often leads us into sin. And he admonishes us not to serve a master that is sin, to turn away from that, because we know better than doing that. He tries to tell us in the scripture here that there's a punishment for sin, right? Now, I grew up as a Presbyterian. I was baptized as a baby as a Presbyterian. I grew up in the Presbyterian church. I wasn't in what you might call a Bible-thumping or very evangelical tradition. But somewhere along the line, I did learn about the punishment for doing wrong, for sin. And quite often that punishment was that it might happen sometime in the near future if you do something wrong. If you steal, you might get caught and sent to prison. But there was also the threat of some eternal problems from sin, of the fires of hell. And I didn't grow up with hell and damnation sermons, but somehow you seem to pick that up through society about that message, that if we sin, we're doomed down the road. But this, Paul, and particularly the Apostle John, say something a little bit different. They're talking to us, and they say, if you sin, there is punishment, and it is immediate. Because sin is the antithesis of life. And so if you enter into sin, you have just stepped out of life into death. Not necessarily physical death. You may still be existing, but you're not living. And that this is a problem, because we're giving up on the opportunity to live. And maybe somewhere down the road, we'll look back on parts of our life and we'll be sad and disappointed that we chose not to live instead of to live. And so the bad news is, from Paul, that we are inclined towards sin. The good news is that we have a loving God, a God that redeems us from this sin. The good news is that we have a God that loves us and that we can become a slave. Now, maybe that second part of that doesn't sound like such good news, being a slave. But you notice that when Paul writes his letters, he often introduces himself. And in many of the letters, he introduces himself as a prophet. But in 3 of the letters, he introduces himself as a servant. And in today's Romans reading, it's interesting. He introduces himself as both a prophet and a servant to Christ. And being a servant was not something particularly good. Being a prophet is something people looked up to. But even back then, when you had slavery, when it was legal and instituted and widespread, being a servant was not something that you necessarily wanted to tout about yourself. But Paul saw it as a wonderful thing, because even in one letter, in his letter to Philemon, he introduces himself not as a servant, but as a prisoner to Christ. But this is a chosen servanthood. This is a chosen imprisonment. Because, as Paul encourages us to do, is to choose the one we're going to obey. Are we going to obey sin? Is sin going to be our master? Or is righteousness and God going to be our master? And Paul says, I willingly choose righteousness and God to be my master, to be the one I'm going to obey. Because we all wind up obeying something. There was a song about that, wasn't there? And so let's choose who it is that we're going to obey. Paul says, choose righteousness. Now, in the Matthew reading, Jesus has been talking to the disciples and been preparing them to send them out and telling them what it was going to be like, and giving them orders and commissions like you are going to go out and proclaim the good news, you're going to go out and heal, you're going to go out and even raise the dead. And as you remember maybe from last week if you were here, oh, and by the way, there's going to be a little trouble along the line. People are going to drag you in front of councils, they're going to arrest you, they're going to beat you, they might even try to kill you. But never mind all that. But here he is kind of wrapping up this speech to his disciples, and he's shifting gears. Because he's doing it kind of slyly, kind of trickily. He's not hitting the disciples over the head with this, but he's letting them know that they will always be in the presence of God. He starts out by saying, if you go and share the good news with someone and they receive it, they receive me. And if they receive me, they receive God. And what he's saying is that no matter who you are, if you're out there sharing the good news, God is right there to be received. It's not like he sees someone ready to receive himself and he swoops in to be received. No, he was present with you from the beginning. And when that person was ready to receive, God was ready there to reach out a hand to them. It's interesting, the word receive in Greek doesn't come across as passive as receive sounds in our language. When we receive something, it sounds like we're just kind of sitting there and something kind of falls in our lap. You know, it's our birthday and we get presents, right? Kind of thing. But it's a much more proactive word in the Greek. It is to reach out and grab hold of. It is to use a tool, as in using a tool, or grabbing hold of a person and grabbing them close to you. So in this instance, receiving the good news is not merely just hearing it, not having it fall upon you, but to actually engage with the good news, to grab hold of that good news and to use it as the guide for your life, to set aside the master you had before and use this as your master. And then Jesus gets into this next part, which is really clear. We probably don't need to talk about it, about receiving a prophet's reward or a righteous man's reward. You all understood that, right? So what was that? What is a prophet's reward? No one's speaking up. Yeah, this is one of those things, if you read Bible commentaries, everybody seems to say something different about this passage. You kind of wonder if this was something that was common knowledge at the time, a prophet's reward, a righteous man's reward, and Jesus just threw that out and everybody knew exactly what he was talking about. But if that's the case, it got lost somewhere along the line because no one really seems to have a concrete idea of exactly what this is that Jesus is talking about. A prophet's reward, a righteous man's reward. There's people who speculate, and we could speculate and probably get kind of close, that maybe a prophet's reward is edification, that we would come to know something. Some people speculate, some commentators speculate that a prophet's reward is a one-on-one encounter with Christ or with God. Through a vision or a dream or a visitation or joy or peace. Maybe peace that's completely unexpected in a given situation. And then there's some speculation on the prophet's reward. Are you getting the same reward that a prophet gets? And a lot of people say, yes, you're not getting any less reward than what a prophet got. It's not like you get a lower level, a downgraded version of the reward. But then there's other people that saying, well, depending upon how you read this, it could be that you're getting a prophet's reward. You're getting a reward from a prophet. So the prophet might be giving you some sort of prophecy that does help edify you or enlighten you or show you the way or bring you joy or peace. Now it's interesting. When you talk about prophets, quite often we think about people who are foretelling the future. But that's a prognosticator, right? Prognosticators tell you the future. And one of our most famous prognosticators is a little furry creature that comes out in February of every year and tells us whether winter will be long or short, right? But a prophet is someone who has been talked to by God and is sharing God's revelation of God's self to us. And that may include something about the future. God may have shared something about the future with this prophet, but that's only one of the things that it could possibly be. A prophet is sharing with us a revelation. God is making God's self known to us through prophets. It's not the only way God makes his self known to us. Certainly through the Bible and through Jesus' life, but also maybe through those rewards like visions and dreams and a one-on-one experience with God, with a strange warming of our heart in some situation where we just know of the presence of God with us. Those are wonderful times when we feel the very presence of God, when it's almost tangible that God is there with us. But Jesus is trying to assure us that it's always the case that God is with us. We're being assured that we are always in the divine presence. So when you're out prophesying among other people and they're receiving this message, God is present with you. When you get called before councils and you need to speak, he assures us, do not worry. Just talk, because God is present with you and his words will be there for you. And even if, as the end of the scripture says, you're one of the little ones and you're doing your little thing, God is present with you in doing that little thing and takes the meager things that we bring and lay on the table and turns those into something much greater than what we could have possibly imagined, than what we could have possibly done through our own efforts, through our own works. So be assured, no matter what you're going through, whether it's wonderful time or some of the persecutions that Jesus warned the disciples about. Whatever you are doing, you're doing it in the presence of the divine. And even when sin may be trying to tempt you and say, hey, obey me, know that you're in the presence of God. That you're in the presence of righteousness, offering you a much better solution and opportunity. So let us go forward confident of that presence. Let us walk forward from here without fear, without anxiety, knowing that we are in that presence, that we have God with us no matter where we are.